If you have any burning questions or comments that you would like to relate to today's topic, please feel free to also put them in the chat and we will get to them as we find them. And we're so excited to go through this with you today. So welcome. Today we're just going to cover the introductions of going over our topic of funding and incentives for the OER field. Just some general things to know, some key problems and solutions that have come up. And in a follow-up email, we will send out today's slides and any resources or recommendations that come as a result of this session. Okay. So funding, the best funding I could find when I was doing some research on this topic is getting grants. There are several states that have different initiatives that they have started. And we have our big states that are huge in the OER world, which is, Colorado, Texas, Connecticut, Michigan. And there are other states that are jumping on the bandwagon and getting started with their own programs. I do want to show y'all these websites. They're pretty interesting. So this is the higher ed for education for Texas. And this is their request for applications for the grant season of, I believe it already has passed, but I think they'll probably do another time, maybe this year, I'm not sure, but you can definitely see like what they're looking at, the grant period, how everything works, how you're eligible, and whatnot if you are planning on doing one in the future. And this link will be shared on when we send out our slides. And then the U.S. Department of Education has pilot programs that they've put together. I'm not as familiar with this, but they are pulling this through. And again, you can come and see what is eligible, how you can get awarded. And a lot of states have, colleges have representatives at their college. Like Jackson State has a representative of OER resources. One of our faculty is the liaison with TBR. So in Tennessee, we have the TBR is the Tennessee Board of Regents, and that's who the community colleges and the TCATs fall under. And so this is brand new. I believe that Tennessee is in phase 4, and they're either in phase 3 or phase 4, which they're trying to go more OER and launch the program in various community colleges. But this is a synopsis of what's going on in the state of Tennessee. And they just launched, they just launched for cycle 4 this year. Go back. So Tennessee just launched their grant of the cycle 4 on February 16th this year. And they are accepting applications for, I think, anyways, I don't know much about it. I have talked a little bit with our OER representative on campus. So if you are unsure of your own colleges, like how you're able to, get on with the grants, then locate your OER representative on your campus, and they can definitely answer your questions. I do know for those of you who are, if you are faculty or not faculty, like, so for myself, if I wanted to transfer a class to OER, I currently do teach a class that is Introduction to Library Skills, but I'm not faculty, so I can't apply for a grant. I could like by myself. I think I could apply for a grant with other faculty, but it wouldn't be converting my class to OER. Now I don't need to apply for a grant because my class is already OER and I use an OER textbook. But that is something to keep in mind if you are faculty or not, depending on how your colleges work in your states. These are some just general resources I found. I do want to show you all these links as well. I don't know if you all are familiar, but there is the Community College Consortium for OER, and next week is Open Education Week, and there are a bunch of seminars and webinars going on that you can sign up for that are talking all about OER and relating to all these different topics that we have covered in our workshop series. And you're able to, I think they do have a listserv community. So if you sign up for the community email, you'll get all the different constant updates and like, people talking about within the listserv questions with using OER and sharing resources. So it's really a really great resource. But yeah, I know several states are doing their Open Education Week, and they're also advertising ahead for states that are coming up within the next couple of months. So there are a lot of other webinars. If you're curious about any step of the OER aspect, there's definitely some free stuff coming up. And then the only other thing I found was, and I know there's more out there, it was just the University of Kentucky has a research guide that they've put together, and that has just OER education access stuff that's coming up, just different resources, and has more stuff about like grant programs and how you could get funding for this. And like I said, the the US Department of Education also has a lot going on too. Basically, if you want to convert to OER, you need to apply for a grant, is what I've found is the best way to get funding for this. And it, looks good if you definitely need to have a main person that's doing more of, representing the group, and then, have other supporting players and faculty who are part of it. Now I'm going to pass. Oh yeah, before I do pass, this is just some other articles I did find that were of interest that are specifically, this is another thing, like, finding resources that are specifically at the community college level I know some of us find difficult, but I did find these two articles that are been recently published within the last 6 years that are specifically looking at OER connecting to community colleges. So I'm going to pass it over to Di.
Yeah, great. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about incentives to get going. So if you have some grant money, either external or internal sources, like what have libraries done with that sort of money and what are some options to do? So the most common sort of incentive that exists on campuses is a grant for adopting existing materials. So this is, you would work with a faculty member to have them select a new course materials for their course. I should point out that most of these that I've found are focus on reducing costs. So they're not necessarily about OERs, but they could be, a lower cost textbook, licensed materials through the library, things like that. Our campus, Central Ohio Technical College, has a program like this. So to give you sort of a bit of context, we are a campus of about 3,000 students on head count. About half of that is concurrent enrollment high school, and half of that is degree-seeking community college students. And how our grant is structured is it's usually done once a semester, and a faculty member working with a librarian can get a $500 award for professional development if they reduce the cost of their course materials by 25%. So it's not even like a huge lift. It does not have to be OER. It does not have to be 100%, down to no cost to students. But that's what we do it. That's how we do it. And it's structured that we meet twice with the librarian. The faculty member meet twice. First is sort of the librarian sort of meets with them to understand the course, what they're looking for. Then we do some research for them, sort of find some options, passes along, and then the faculty member makes the decision. So pretty low staff time for both the faculty member as well as the librarians, but it has some pretty strong outcomes. So in our autumn semester of 2023, about a third of our students were impacted, so 1,100 students, and it saved $73,000. So with just a couple of meetings and additions to a few courses, we were able to achieve that. There are some other ways that librarians sort of try to incentivize OERs. So there are some who take some grant money and award it to participants in workshop series, where it'll be a series of workshops to inform people, faculty members, about what are OERs, what can you do with them, maybe be tied to a sort of a adoption process, but is not necessarily tied to that. There are some reports from people who have this in some research articles that they say that these outcomes are sort of not very clear, and they are very time and labor intensive. And one organization that sort of felt that way, which is sort of leading into the grants for creating OERs, is Ohio University. So not far from us here. They had these workshops, but they felt like they were a little bit too intensive in terms of staff time, to scheduling with the faculty, things like that. And so they switched over to sort of the librarians are doing project management, and sort of guiding people through the creation of OERs, which I think is sort of an interesting approach. And they use some money to actually pay students to sort of be involved with the creation of the OERs. So they would pay sort of graduate or advanced graduate students to work with the faculty members to sort of create some content, create test questions, things like that. Obviously, this like doesn't necessarily work in the community college setting for some various reasons. We don't have the luxury often of those graduate students or those advanced undergraduates to do that. But I do think it's interesting to sort of think about using students in this process and how they have sort of successfully done that. One other way they sort of use students is when courses were being piloted, some of the material from those students would be sort of, with the students' permission, be rolled into the next semester as part of these OER textbooks that were created. These institutions that are involved in sort of these grants for creating OERs tend to be larger institutions who have staff that are dedicated in the library to OER development or sort of advocacy. There's obviously lots of issues that go involved in creating OERs. You've got, the issues of copyright that you have to be aware of, the technical issues, all these sorts of things. So based on your context, that might not be a possibility. And like I said, it tends to be larger institutions. But maybe, you're lucky and you have someone who's sort of dedicated to affordable learning or OERs, and that was sort of a possible route to go. If you'll switch to the next slide, Ruth. So also some research beyond like what these incentives can do. What are some concerns from faculty and how do they feel about OERs? This is a question we sort of had asked in our first session of this workshop series, whereas, how do you deal with faculty resistance? So I thought we could talk a little bit about that now. So looking at a variety of surveys, these are some issues that faculty had. They had problems finding any or quality OERs. So this is a particular concern in some fields, especially sort of more advanced courses. There's lots of really good OERs that are available for introductory first or second year courses, but the more advanced you get, the more particular you get. That was a struggle that faculty had. Obviously, this is an intervention that librarians can really help out with. We are experts at finding things, right? So that is one way that we can sort of intervene in that, is finding those quality things for them. Another concern is that faculty might be really excited about the idea of OERs, but they just don't feel like they have the time to adapt their courses to sort of meet those. They maybe have been using a textbook that they've used for years, and they just don't want to swap over, and they're concerned about the amount of labor that's involved, which should not be discounted. Anytime that a material is changed, that is a big change, but OERs in particular do not have some of the some collateral things, like you don't have a test bank sometimes, or prepackaged presentations and things like that some sort of commercially available textbooks have. So there's a concern about the labor intensive aspect. Faculty have also expressed that there's no connection to tenure promotion, whether they use OERs or not. The colleges are not looking at, are we saving students money? Are we incentivizing this in any sort of way that matters to them? So that is a major issue. That if you're, depending on your status on your campus, perhaps you can sort of intervene and sort of, push for that a little bit as some sort of recognition in the tenure and promotion process. Another sort of concern or issue to bring up this is from Julia Rodriguez's survey of faculty at Oakland University, that 20% of faculty just had no idea how much their textbooks cost for their students. They were just completely unaware. And some disciplines, her survey was sort of small, so maybe this is 1 or 2 faculty members, but some disciplines had sort of what I think is eye-popping upper limits for what they would consider a reasonable price for a textbook. So some fields of engineering and art history thought that a textbook was less than $300. That was like an okay limit to have. Oakland University defines an affordable textbook as less than $40, and only about a third of departments who were surveyed said that they had textbooks that was sort of the limit they thought was appropriate. Most were in the $100 to $200 range. A thing about this textbook cost awareness, the longer that a faculty member had been teaching, the less aware they were of how much their textbook cost. They just, it's not something that's on their radar, is what it seems like. On the flip side, however, those who are the most contingent, so the most, temporary sort of positions, who might be sort of new to the field and maybe be more aware of these costs of textbooks, were also the least aware of OERs and the possibilities of OERs. So you've got this sort of like complicated thing where those who are maybe the most experienced are aware of OERs, but also have no idea the benefits on the cost side. And the other side, the ones who are most sort of attuned to the cost, don't realize the possibility of OERs. So that are some concerns by faculty. And what can we do as librarians to sort of like address these? I'll have some suggestions sort of like on the next slide, if we'll go. Ruth, if you'll click through the next slide. Thank you. So these are just some talking points that I would suggest, or sort of steps for engagement on how to sort of work with these concerns that faculty might have. The first one is that always driving home that this is an equity issue. I think a lot of people are sort of like fixated, I don't know if that's the right word, sort of keenly aware that OERs, it's a concern about cost. But there are actually other knock-on benefits besides just the cost reduction. So both the University of Georgia and the University of Northern Colorado have done some tracking of passing and completion rates from OERs versus non-OER courses, and these increased, the passing and the completion rates increased significantly for Pell eligible, non-white, and first generation students. So at the University of Northern Colorado, for example, 5 percentage points higher in OER courses for all of those groups were more likely to pass. So this is, I mean, I think we can sort of imagine why this would be. These are people who might not have as much access to these sorts of things, especially Pell eligible students, or might not be as familiar with navigating sort of the academic environment as we have with first generation students. But it's not just that it's a cost issue, it seems to have some sort of academic benefit as well for these sort of groups that we are concerned about and in terms of equity. There are some meta-analyses or systematic reviews that have sort of questioned these findings, I will say, though all of them have found that there has been no negative impact of using OERs, which some researchers say this is, like whether there's a benefit or not might be unclear, but there is no negative outcome. So that's why that's a positive. The second sort of talking point or way to sort of work in this, work faculty up to the ideas of OER is that faculty report that this reshapes their pedagogy. They notice increased student engagement when they use OERs. There's more flexibility here. So one thing to think about is, who on your campus, even if they're not using OERs, who are the ones who are like really interested in pedagogy and like tinkering with things? Those are maybe some sort of ways to do that. To sort of think about how to approach this and how to get them sort of over to thinking about OERs, or to work with, if you have a department that focuses on teaching and learning and sort of improving that, they might have some people who they can sort of funnel your direction. The third sort of route into sort of like expanding OERs is to be aware that faculty decisions on textbooks, according to research are driven mostly by department and administrators, meaning that if there is pressure to adopt OERs, they're going to figure out how to do it, right? And it's not driven by necessarily their concerns about cost or their own personal interest. I mean, these things obviously play into it as well. So maybe the level of advocacy that needs to happen is not at the level of the individual instructor, but more in that departmental administrator level to sort of get these people to understand the benefits and reasons for OER besides cost reduction. So that's sort of like a different sort of approach to it. And lastly, I think it's just super important to manage expectations. As I mentioned, that faculty have that concern that there are not quality OERs in some fields. That is like the reality. There are some areas that are just not covered as well. Fortunately, there are lots being produced, and hopefully, in a few years, this will not be as much of an issue as it is now. But just make them aware of like what this is, and also like make them understand that it's not the same as that sort of packaged commercial textbook they're going to get. But at the same time, make them aware that it doesn't mean that it's hastily put together, that it's poorly edited, that it's not engaging for students, those sorts of things. So I think the more aware you are and the more that you can clearly communicate what OERs are and can do for faculty, the better that it will go on that front. The next slide is just some of the resources, some additional articles where I sort of got this information from, these sort of faculty surveys and information like that. And hopefully that's like a little helpful for those of you who had some concerns about faculty resistance. But now, and we have plenty of time now for some questions, maybe some suggestions from other people of ways they've dealt with faculty resistance or incentives that they know have worked really well on their campus. So yeah, we can sort of open it up. You can ask in the chat, and we can address those questions, and we can just sort of see where the conversation takes us. So for those who aren't looking at the chat, Michelle Pratt mentions that faculty are most likely to adopt when hearing about it from other faculty members. Yes, this is something that also the research does show that faculty do not rate librarians as a place to go for adoption textbook ideas, but they do other faculty as a key, and professional organizations as a key place where they go. Let's see.
We had a question on what is the best site, listserv, portal to monitor to keep up with grants related to OER. Honestly, I mean, staying on the pulse of your state is really good to see what's going on there. I actually found out a lot from my representative on campus, more than I knew that was going on. And then joining that listserv that I showed earlier, the CC OER, they have a ton of information in there that is about the grants, but then not as much about the grants, but it has just like what's going on in the OER world everywhere.
Jamie, to answer your question about creating asynchronous workshops, I have actually not seen any that have been produced sort of from a more general sort of position. I do know that some individual librarians have created them sort of like institution specific. So I don't know if you're asking sort of like a general thing, but I do know they exist sort of institution specific, that sort of workshop model where explaining it to faculty and turning that into some sort of asynchronous possibility. But that does seem like a great idea, to sort of have a more general asynchronous sort of resource to sort of point faculty to. So there is a question about creating admin to buy in. Um, I I think in our context, data about persistence and completion rates is really convincing to admin. So some of the things that I are in those resources there showed like the improved outcomes, either academic or um, a sort of academic performance or persistence. So that is one angle, but I know that's just sort of like a specific thing that sort of works at our institution. So I don't know if others have other ideas where they've had success in getting their administration to sort of buy into this. But that is like what has sort of been like, I would say the angle that we can take that works, because that is what we want, right? We want students to continue. We want them to perform well. We want them to graduate. And if OERs can funnel that, they can sort of justify spending the money to make it happen.
I'm answering Tara. One thing I did see within the grants is they do offer like lots of like it's a good amount of money to like do the whole year process. And I think I haven't looked at the grants extensively, but I did notice that some of them are like, you know, $5,000, $8,000. Like they're extensive, they're a good amount of money to like figure out how to transform that class into OER and like go that way. Cause also, and one thing we did talk about the course marking from our last session was it's not complete, you know, not all the classes will be like 100% OER, but they could be like significantly reduced cost. Um, and I think that can go in with the funding as well. I'm just thinking of our college has done OER for the US history classes and they're using a textbook. I don't know how they I don't know how it happened exactly, but I do know we're using that. So they're not doing things with the bookstore, and how they've implemented it is everyone who's teaching US history, either one or two, is using this textbook. And they did pilot. I saw someone talking about the pilot. Like I think they did. One professor did pilot it in her class to see how it worked, and then eventually like switched everything over. And they're still switching things over. Like it's still in the process of happening. Beatrice, you're talking about the pairs of faculty to develop OERs. If you look at some of the grants, they actually want more than just one faculty member to be doing it. They want pairs, they want groups. So if it's, you know, say it's the English department and two or three professors are partnering together to do it, the grants are looking for that. Jennifer, the links will all be sent out at the end of our mini series. So after the last one in April, we'll send out all 4 links.
Jamie's asking about sustainability grants. That is not something that I have information about. I don't know if others, I know people are checking the chat, but I don't know if others are familiar with some sustainability grant sort of directions that they could share. But that is not something that I'm familiar with, unfortunately.
Something was just shared about the Oklahoma State regions of higher ed. I'm not sure if that is answering your question, Jamie. And yeah, I honestly don't know much about the grants. I just pulled what I found online.
I do like the Oklahoma Incentive Awards training. That could be an incentive that I didn't think about having an award.
As y'all leave, I do want to thank you for coming. And if you have more questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We can answer them as they come. And if you have any other resources too, feel free to also drop those in and we will include those in when we send the email about the slides and the recordings. We do have 2 more events coming up. We have next month in March, we have inclusive access on March 28th. And then on April 25th, we'll have creating OER at the community college level.
I have a question. Is there any possible way of looking at joining your group? Or is through ACRL?
Yes, so you can still fill out a volunteer form and put that you want to volunteer your time for the OER CJCLS.
Thank you.
You're welcome.